Good afternoon. I think we should get started, even though we are having a few technical difficulties. My name is Virginia Strom-Martin, and I chair the Education Committee in the Assembly. I'd like to welcome you today. This is, in fact, a joint informational hearing of the Assembly Committee on Education and the Assembly Higher Ed Committee on Teaching Methodologies. The purpose of the hearing is to explore the possibilities as well as the obstacles in creating a classroom environment where our children feel a sense of belonging and where physical and mental health and a lifelong love of learning are nurtured. The hearing will be in 3 segments. First, we will hear about teaching methodologies supported by the American Sports Institute. We'll have an overview of the role of the state in developing and implementing teacher training and professional development programs. And finally, we will hear the effects of high-stakes testing on teaching methodology from teachers and administrators. We're first going to hear from experts who have developed an innovative approach to teaching that integrates aspects of the sports culture and research on states of consciousness as they relate to learning preparedness and how students learn best. Please be forewarned that during this first segment, Mr. Joel Kirsch of the American Sports Institute will intermittently conduct exercises used in the classroom to invigorate students and enhance concentration. We are all expected to participate, and I'm sure we will benefit from this exercise. Our second segment will give us a brief overview of how teacher training and professional development programs are developed and implemented. In our final segment, testimony will be given by individuals and organizations on the effects of high-stakes testing on our classroom environment. This is an issue that is having a tremendous impact on how our teachers teach and how our children connect with the classroom experience. There will be an opportunity for public comments at the end of the hearing, and as you can see, we do have a very long agenda this afternoon, and so please, our presenters, try to confine or members actually try to confine your questions to just a few minutes at the conclusion of each speaker's comments. And I would also ask each speaker to try to stay within the parameters of the time allotted. I am eager to hear from the excellent panel of witnesses that we've put together, and I have to give credit where credit is due. My consultant, Mavon Garrity, has done an excellent job assembling this agenda over many, many months. But first, I would like to ask my colleagues who have joined us here if they would have any opening remarks. We have with us 2 senators, Senator Tom Torlakson and Senator John Vasconcellos.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Appreciate the opportunity to be here and on such an important topic. We know how important the teacher is for the success of youngsters learning in a classroom. Obviously, the method of teaching that teacher uses can make the world of difference in terms of how they connect with the students and motivate them. So a very, very key topic you've focused on. Thank you for holding this hearing and inviting us to participate.
Senator Vasconcellos.
Just that I'm pleased to be here on behalf of the Senate Education Committee to welcome my longtime friend and compadre George Leonard, and to indicate that we're in the Senate looking at teaching methodologies, but especially how students learn and kind of the interior of learning, how we become learners for life, and this is an area where this might well fit.
Thank you. And Assembly Member Sally Havas has also joined us.
I would like to thank the chair for calling this hearing, and for all of you for coming today to present this information to us. I think it's, as a community college English professor myself, and having gone through teacher education training for secondary education, I know how invaluable the methodologies are to teachers in the classroom, and to the students, of course, because it helps them to learn. And I've always been concerned about the transfer of that information and that knowledge of methodologies from the K-12 to higher education. There is something that needs to be looked at within that realm. Thank you very much, Assembly Member Strom-Martin.
Thank you. And with that, we will begin with our first presenter, Mr. Joel Kirsch, who is the president of the American Sports Institutes, and he is going to conduct the first segment of our hearing. Welcome.
And the cameras.
And the cameras, by the way, I have to give permission for them to be present, and you have that permission. Thank you.
I would like to thank Martin and Mavon Garrity, consultant for the committee, for inviting all of us here representing the American Sports Institute for this hearing. And Mavon, you've been most gracious and most efficient throughout this whole 5-month process. Thank you very, very much. What I'd like to do, since this is a hearing on education, I'd like to start off with a test question. Okay? And I'd like to present it to the committee members and senators up here. Only the chair has done this before, so she knows the answer. So if you don't mind, would you please abstain from putting forth an answer? So it's up to Senators Torlakson and Vasconcellos. The Olympic Games just ended in Salt Lake City. They were a huge, huge success. And at the Olympic Games, I'd like to know, test question, what 2 events bring the most number of people to those events and command the highest price ticket?
Ice skating?
Ice skating? Senator, any? No idea. No idea.
Opening and closing.
Senator Torlakson, by the way, a triathlete and former coach. Okay? Right, it's the opening and closing ceremonies for the Olympic Games. This year, $885 for a ticket to the opening ceremonies. That's quite a bit. The opening and closing ceremonies are part of the ritual of the Olympic Games. And it's not just about, the Olympics are not just about swifter, higher, stronger. They're about establishing culture that creates a sense of place and belonging for the Games. As a matter of fact, all athletic events in America start off with a ritual, and that ritual is our national anthem. Every game, high school, college, professional, starts off with the national anthem. Major League Baseball, there's a ritual of the 7th inning stretch. They don't even have to announce it. Everybody just does it. So what we're going to do is take a few moments to create a sense of place and belonging, just like the Olympic Games. And another question that I'd like to pose to the dais is, when a team's in a huddle, volleyball, basketball, football, and the coach calls a play and coach goes, okay, on 3 break, 1, 2, 3 break, and everybody claps. Why are they doing that? Coach?
Show unity and determine purpose.
Right. The purpose, we all know what the purpose is, and everybody's on the same page. And when they're not clapping at different times, they all clap together. So there's another ritual clap, if you will, that comes from the Japanese martial art of Aikido. That George Leonard, up here next to me on my left, is a 5th-degree black belt. And I trained in for 5 years. And we use this hand clap ritual as a way to open all our educational reform programs from the elementary level up to the high school level. So what we're going to do is I'm going to teach all of you here this clap-in activity, and then we're all going to do it together. And just like with sports, if we don't get it right the first time, we'll do it a second time. Okay, here's how this works. And first we're just going to practice this. And feels a little goofy at first. Okay, but you'll be hearing from some students toward the end of our presentation, and feel free to ask them how they feel about it. Okay? And the way it works is the teacher or sensei stands up in front of the class, the Aikido class, and he or she, in this case, being male, I'll say he puts his hands together like this, and all the students sitting in what's called seiza, on their knees in a martial arts position, they do the same thing. And when the sensei or teacher sees that everyone is ready, he claps his hands twice in succession like that, and all the students clap in unison with the teacher. So, if you would please, just for a minute, and I know it might feel a little uncomfortable at first,
But you'll see how this feels once we all do it. Would everyone, just on your own, just practice doing that twice. And members of the audience, please. Just on your own. Good. Okay. I'm going to step to the side so everybody can see me. I'll clap us in. And like I said, if we don't get it the first time, and a lot of you are doing this for the first time, we'll try it again. We only had one person out of sync. Let's try it again. All of us together. Thank you very much. Thank you. Okay. Now we've had our opening ceremony. Now, for a different kind of test for the members on the dais and the members of the audience. And I'll have to keep turning back and forth here. This is a 2-question survey. And with this survey, what I'd like you to do is give your answers truthfully and from the heart. This survey has been presented to thousands of legislators, educators, principals, superintendents, teachers, students, general public. And once we're done doing the survey, I'll tell you what the results have been with all these thousands and thousands of people. 2-question survey. First question. On a scale of 10, with 10 being totally excited and 1 totally apathetic, how excited are middle and high school students today in America and in California, across the board, about going to school only for their academic courses? Not the social parts of school, not the extracurricular parts of school, just their academic courses such as calculus or science or government, courses like this. And what I'll do for everyone, I'll turn around so everyone can see me. We'll start at 10 and go down, and when you want to cast your vote from the heart, just simply raise your hand. And then I'll tell you what the results have been of this survey over the years. Excuse me. Okay, first, are there any 10s? 10 is totally excited, 1 is totally apathetic. Any 9s? Any 8s? Tell the truth, speak from the heart. Any 7s? Any 6s? We have 2 6s. Any 5s? We have about a dozen. Any 4s? 15. Any 3s? Leave it up here. Any 2s? And 1. Okay. Next question. Are human beings, especially children, school children, natural learners or unnatural learners? And this one, I mean, we just have to. How many would say natural learners? Right. Everybody says that. Okay, so the range of responses, as was the case here, we had 2 6s and then it was 5 4s, 3 2 1s. The range of response to the first question from thousands and thousands of people is 2 to 5. Most of the answers. The response given most often is a 3. Everyone says that kids are natural learners. So the question becomes, if human beings, especially children, school children, are natural learners, but they are apathetic because the response given most often is a 3, the logical conclusion is that there is something fundamentally wrong at the core of our nation's, and this includes California's, educational system. Because if they're natural learners, the response would be an 8, 9, 10. So something is going on here. In addition to this, the health of the nation's and California's school children is rapidly deteriorating. For school children, the condition is staggering. Nationally, the incidence of overweight children in the United States, age 4 to 12, has gone up dramatically in the past 12 years. For Caucasian children, it's gone up 50% in the last 12 years. For Latino children, 120%. and for African American children, 175. Here's what's scary about this. It used to take 30 years for the incidence of overweight and obesity to double in America. If we project the scores I just gave you over 30 years, it would be 125% for Caucasian children, 300% for Latino children, and 438% for African American children. These statistics have profound implications for California in that during the 1990s, 47.5% of all births in this state were to Latina women. To compound this problem in California, according to the Public Health Institute, nearly 1 in 3 California adolescents is considered at risk of becoming or is already overweight. And as I'm sure you all know, 77% of California's students in grades 5, 7, and 9 failed the 6-category mandated state fitness gram. 77% failed. That means they failed to meet minimum standards. They didn't fail to meet mid-level or high standards, but minimum standards. Dr. James Hill, a leading nutritionist at the University of Colorado, says we've got the fattest, least fit generation of kids ever. At the nonprofit American Sports Institute, we define education as the process by which all learners acquire the attitude, knowledge, skills, and wisdom necessary to fulfill their potential as they pursue their bliss. We view education as a lifelong journey that addresses the whole learner physically, mentally, and spiritually in the context of the ancient Greeks, and this is done through a balanced and integrated process. We believe at ASI that human beings are natural learners and that education in our schools is less about imparting information to students than helping them find meaning and fulfillment in their lives as they pursue endeavors they're interested in and enjoy. Whether this comes from the West and Galileo, who said you cannot teach a person anything, you can only help one to find it within oneself, or the East, the Chinese proverb, teachers should be wicks that light the candle, not pitchers that fill the mug. The message is the same. Sadly, as we can see, this is not the case for the vast majority of students in our nation's schools and in California's schools. Most kids are bored and disengaged. They're not excited about their academic courses. They don't go to the school for the sake of learning. They go to school to get out. Teachers and school administrators are overwhelmed and frustrated. Parents are concerned. Compounding this problem, at the core of our nation's and California's educational system, we see that the very process we use to educate students in our schools is contributing to the children becoming physically unfit, overweight and obese, which often leads to diabetes, heart disease, and cancer in adulthood. The college preparatory curriculum mandated by the University of California and California State University systems contain no physical or bodily domain requirements. In fact, in high school, physical education is only an elective in the 11th and 12th grades. The issue here is that we do not elect to be physical beings. We are physical beings. Our institutions of higher education do not value the physical domain, the very essence of our being and existence. As a result, college prep has become the unintended equivalent of disease prep. Outgoing U.S. Surgeon General David Satcher, who just left office February 13th, has made the following statements regarding this problem. In the last 20 years, the incidence of overweight and obesity has doubled among children and tripled among adolescents. The schools are critical points of intervention. They have a responsibility to our children that we are not living up to. Given the apathy in our classrooms and the deteriorating health of our students, it could be said that figuratively and literally, our school children are dying to learn. So what's going on here? What we have found is that while most of the reform efforts are trying to figure out what's going on in the kids' heads, the real issue has to do with what is in their hearts. It isn't that the kids can't learn in the current learning environment. It's that they don't want to. They are apathetic and disengaged. So if our problems in education today are more about what's in our students' hearts than their heads, then what is going on with their hearts? If the kids are apathetic and unhealthy, how did we get to this point? What are the implications of where we are? And where do we look for solutions that'll change the current situation? We have 4 highly respected experts who are here to address these issues today. In order of their testimonies, they include Mr. George Leonard, Dr. Barbara McCombs, Dr. David Chernoff, and Dr. Tim Byers. And would each speaker, when you first come up, just give 15, 20 seconds, if you would, about your background. Thank you. Mr. Leonard.
Okay, we have a question. Senator Vasconcellos.
Well, I was puzzled by your opening because as I understood the test you asked us to register on is how many kids we think, what percentage go to school just to learn academics.
How many, the question was, how excited are middle and high school students about going to school only for their academic courses?
Only 4.
Yes.
But that's what I voted the 3 on. But then your statement opening up here, I mean, I agree with everything else you said, but that one statement was that, therefore, the whole system's a failure. I mean, I don't think, that's not, there's a third position in there that just logically doesn't hold.
Yeah,
the fact is, a lot of kids go because they're excited about learning and about social and about sports. And that's not a failure.
Then I would say, why aren't sports considered equal with other courses?
But that's not the point. I'm not looking to answer your questions or to quarrel, but to say the system's a failure because all the kids don't go there just to learn, to me, doesn't wash. The rest of what you say I love. But that piece doesn't fit for me, so we don't register that. I'm not going to quarrel with you.
Yeah, and yeah, okay. Assemblymember Haffis.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Will anyone be addressing today the role of hunger and poverty as it relates to learning? You see, children going to school hungry have a hard time really caring about whether they learn or not, because how can you concentrate when you're hungry? Another thing is the overweight caused by poverty, because the food that costs less is the most difficult for the body, the most dangerous for the body, and causes those problems. Last year, we had a bill that went through that was successful regarding junk food on campuses, school campuses, the lower grades. That was a good idea, but it's really not enough to address the fact that children become overweight also because they don't have the kind of food they need for a balanced diet. And then there's also the factor of violence on the school campus, how much of that is caused by this lack of a healthy diet. I can't help but remember my Uncle Larry, who's about 90 now, and he always jokes, but he's being facetious when he says, stay away from the candy, because I still have all my teeth as old as I am because we were too poor to have candy. So, he looks at it in a positive manner, but there are other health problems that are caused by that lack of a proper diet. It's not that they don't know how to eat. It's that they don't have the means by which to have that kind of food. So will someone be addressing that?
Yes, Dr. Byers from the University of Colorado Medical School will talk about that. And it will also be addressed in a big picture perspective regarding how we approach education.
Yes, and what we think, what considerations we have about the child, and all these other factors, and the methodologies have to be based upon the child's learning style and the conditions from which the child comes, right? Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Leonard.
Another question, I'm sorry. Assemblymember Jackson has a question.
Yeah, I'd like to follow up on Senator Vasconcellos' observations about how kids often go to school for the social aspects. That is their world, and I have a teenager myself, was a senior in high school, so I'm acutely aware. It isn't just that we're really stupid and annoying as parents that wants them to escape to school, but that's really where they are going to develop their value systems, where they develop their relationship skills, and that, if I'm not mistaken, that has to be factored into one of the elements, one of the values of school is its socialization, for better or for worse, depending upon what goes on there these days. But certainly, I think even in early education, we emphasize the importance of being with other children and the socialization skills that children develop. So it's not a question of wanting to, kind of overdo an issue, but is this something that you do, in fact, factor into your discussions? And if so, is that going to be addressed here, too, as part of the whole, it isn't just going to school and learning, math. It's also learning life skills. So, again, that's part of it. If it's going to be a positive experience, then obviously I think children are more interested in the overall experience. So am I off on this one?
No, I think you're right on target. And as a matter of fact, Dr. McCombs will be talking about the learner-centered principles that are important for the entire learning environment. And we're looking at the issues of why aren't these socialization processes a part of our academic courses? Why doesn't that go on in that coursework, so we have a holistic approach to learning, rather than you go to extracurricular activities and student government for the socialization, but you go to math class for math? Why are they separate? So we're going to be addressing these issues.
Right.
Thank you.
Yes. Mr. Kirsch, correct me if I'm wrong, but going back again to Senator Vasconcellos' point, when we were given the test, I think your point is that it's not the academic subjects which in fact excite and engage and inspire our students.
Exactly.
It's the other activities such as drama, art, sports, and so forth that really do engage the students and in many cases keep them in school so they don't drop out.
That's 100% correct.
Okay.
And the issue is then, how can we bring those principles, concepts into the academic environment?
Exactly.
But
okay.
is the premise that that's the way it should be, or just that there are some failures in the academic approach, or what are you suggesting? Is this good, or?
I think the suggestion is that all of those other aspects that really do excite and engage kids, whether it be sports or the arts, can in fact be factored into the regular curriculum. It's called thematic integrated instruction, and there are actually many teachers doing this type of thing. So let's give the presenters a chance to present.
Okay.
And then we'll have questions afterward. Thank you.
Mr. Leonard.
Good afternoon. My name is George Leonard. I'm very honored to be here. I don't know if I really want to push this time clock yet. I'm saying hello. I'm sorry you did, because I'm going to say hello first. Okay. I've done many different things. I've written and published 12 books. I don't know how many magazine articles. I've done many different types of work. I 17 years with Look magazine and worked for Esquire. I'm an Aikido school. I'm currently president of Esalen Institute. But I'm really most proud of the fact that I have, right now, 6 grandchildren for my 4 daughters. And they range in age from 1 month to 14 years. So they are your people. I'm so honored to be here. Schools are so important. Thank you. I want to say that the human brain is the most complex, most beautifully organized entity in the known universe. Weighing only some 2% of our total body weight, this greedy organ consumes around 20% of all the nutrients and blood and oxygen in our blood. The number of possible connections among our 100 billion or so neurons, brain cells, is greater than the number of atoms in the known universe. We are born with an overwhelming need and desire to learn, to make more and more new connections in our brain. To learn prodigiously from birth to death is what makes us human. We are born to learn. Consider the fact that by the time our children start to school, Almost all of them have completed one of the most spectacular learning feats on this planet: the basic mastery of spoken language with no formal instruction whatever. Rather than that, they've enjoyed a feast of high-intensity interaction with their learning environment, which in this case comprises all the adults and older children around them. Here are teachers who react immediately and positively to success, permit approximations, and aren't likely to indulge in lectures. That is to say, the best kind of teachers, the best kind of teaching. That teaching is individualized. It's also group teaching. It is teaching that is self-paced. So, interaction, engagement, enjoyment. These are the key words for any truly successful school reform. Sadly, our efforts in this regard over the past 2 decades have, by and large, moved us in just the opposite direction. We can date it back to April 26, 1983. That was when a report from the National Commission on Excellence in Education was released to the public. The report, A Nation at Risk, the Imperative for Educational Reform, was a Cold War document from beginning to end. I quote, "Our nation is at risk. Our once unchallenged preeminence in commerce, industry, science, and technological innovation is being overtaken by competitors throughout the world. If an unfriendly foreign power had attempted to impose on America the mediocre education performance that exists today, we might have viewed it as an act of war. We have, in effect, been committing an act of unthinking, unilateral educational disarmament." The report promised fundamental reform, but actually offered no significant changes in the way we educated our young people, but only more and tougher of the same. A longer school day and year, far more homework, and much more time given to the academic basics, which of course translates to much less time devoted to the creative and integrative subjects. All this was underlined by a demand for a nationwide system of standardized achievement tests. The report was directed primarily at high school, where education reform is least effective. The students in the school, believe me, were hardly mentioned. As for that magical point of intersection, that point of intersection between the learner and the learning environment, the very essence of education, not a word. A Nation at Risk received spectacular publicity. It was followed by many more reports on education, most of them taking the same line, while offering no real reform whatever. We know now that the scare tactics used to justify this rigid, get tough approach to schooling were based on a false premise. The unfriendly foreign power, read the Soviet Union, that supposedly was overtaking us was doing nothing of the sort. In fact, the Soviet Union, with an education system very similar to the one proposed in A Nation at Risk, was already in free fall toward the 1989 collapse of the entire system. And the U.S.? The U.S. was on the verge of the most spectacular period of technological innovation and economic achievement in world history. Even the Japanese, with their traditional 6-day-a-week, rigid, test-heavy education system, must have finally seen the error of their ways, revealed to them by their long technological and economic slump. In the year 2000, a commission appointed by the Japanese government to propose directions for the new millennium recommended, among other liberating measures, that their schools reduce the compulsory academic school week from 6 to 3 days, thus making room for more individualized, creative education, less emphasis on testing. And still we in the U.S. go right on, blindly and doggedly marching in precisely the wrong direction. Today, the need for students to do well on standardized achievement tests dominates the entire educational enterprise. Anything not included on the test gets short shrift. At a time when our economy is based on innovation and out-of-the-box thinking, students are forced to focus ever more narrowly on rote answers to limiting questions. Our so-called reformers have not only put our school children in a box, but have also reinforced it by steel, locked it tight, and thrown away the key. Recent research, as well as old-time common sense, tell us that what we practice is what we learn. And what are our kids now practicing? They're practicing checking the right answers on achievement tests. Is that what they'll be doing as grown-ups? And we shouldn't forget that for every hour spent practicing for the test is 1 hour less for real education. Far more homework, a key demand in a nation at risk, has produced results that are nothing less than scandalous. Some children in elementary school are being assigned up to 2 hours homework a night. I know, I have grandkids. Middle school students carry book-filled backpacks, sometimes weighing 25 pounds or more. I know that too. Actually, the cry for far more homework stands as a tacit admission that the schools, as now operated, are simply unable to get the job done themselves. Yes, our wrong-way journey to education reform has taken us to any number of unpleasant destinations. What, for example, has happened to that blessed time for fantasy, imagination, and creative thought we call play? For that matter, what's happened to any and all vigorous movement? Now, I don't think I'm going to tell about all the terrible things that are happening to our kids' health because I hear other people talking about that. But we can't blame the current direction of education for all these ills, but must share some of the blame. Nor should we make today's teachers responsible for a situation they themselves often abhor. All across California, in fact, teachers who won bonuses of $591 in 2001 for raising their students' test scores registered their protest of our current testing mania by donating their prizes to innovative programs, scholarships, and charities. For some 35 years, I had the privilege as a journalist of visiting scores of schools and hundreds of classrooms all across America, sometimes sitting at a child's desk for weeks on end, taking the child's viewpoint, sharing his or her experience in class, at recess, at lunch, and at home. Of course, I also interviewed teachers and administrators and education experts, but that just isn't enough. Please do it. Stay in the classroom for a few days or weeks, and you'll share the unbearable boredom and inefficiency that's almost inevitable in frontal teaching, where the teacher stands or sits in front of the class, pouring out a one-way stream of information. And you'll come to treasure those magical moments of learning when interaction, engagement, and joy are at their heights. That it is possible to make the academics more exciting. Group work, there are schools that are doing this. It's not all gloom. The George Lucas Educational Foundation, if you contact them, they are making a survey of schools all over the country that have kids working together as groups. In our life, we also, if you need something, you'll always try it out on some friend. We work together as groups. That's exciting education. We can make it self-paced in many ways. We can use computers for some of the individualized learning of the basics of the math, for example. We can do many, many different things. But stay in class long enough and you'll also come to realize that effective schooling involves more than just what we call the mind-body split, the mind-body spirit split. One of the key elements in most of the so-called reform efforts is, in fact, one of the great obstacles to learning. From reading to reform proposals, you'd think that human beings are disembodied brains, but employers don't hire disembodied brains, nor can dehumanized, abstract thought solve the world's problems. The mutual entailment of sensing, feeling, and thinking becomes clearer every day. I very much doubt that any long-term educational improvement is possible without attention to such creative and integrative studies as art, music, dance, drama, physical education. That doesn't mean cutting back on good academic education. We'll talk about that. We're born with an awesome potential to learn and achieve. In the words of the late novelist James Agee, our being cheated of it is infinitely the ghastliest, commonest, and most inclusive of all the crimes of which the human world can accuse itself. When at last we create schools designed to release our children's enormous undeveloped potential, that era will be known for all times as education's finest hour. Thank you, and I'd love to talk with anything you have to say.
Thank you. Yes, Mr. Bogue has a question.
Thank you, Madam Chair. 2 comments. First, I appreciate your comments on the backpack bill. Unfortunately, that we actually are familiar with that problem, and this legislature passed, both houses actually passed a bill that would study the effects of backpacks on students. Unfortunately, the governor vetoed that. You talked earlier in your comments about standards, right. And you kind of compared standards to thinking out of the box, and I guess my question, you said we shouldn't be focusing on testing and standards, if I'm paraphrasing your words right. Because that takes away time from students who can then go out and think outside the box. My question to you is, if we have a student that can't read or can't write at a grade level, and we don't have any way to know that, is that thinking out of the box? To have someone that can't perform at a level that, quite frankly, won't allow that person to go out and get a job? As you mentioned earlier, you had if you were a newspaper organization, you're not going to hire someone that can't read or write. So
I agree with you 100%. I don't think there's any question about it. And actually, I had more about it, but I was told to keep within 8 minutes. I would like to say more about that I think, as some people have already suggested, that academics can be made exciting, and I think there should be some accountability, without question. I'm not saying we shouldn't take the test. I'm saying this, that they should not dominate our education system. These achievement tests can be given. Another thing that I would put in mind, that is that they not take 1 minute away from academics and other studies or practicing for those tests in class, because that takes it away. You don't know how much time is being spent to practice for those tests. My 14-year-old is going through that now. In other words, I agree with you. People must know how to read, and I think that can be done much more effectively than it's being done now. Individualized, self-paced, group work, and I think we can make it happen. Thank you very much.
Mr. Bogue, a follow-up?
Yeah, I'm curious about if you say, well, students on one hand should be spending time on other academic, if they are in fact doing that, shouldn't they be passing the standards anyways?
If they're doing what?
It seems to me that you've presented that the standards aren't necessarily a good thing, and that they really take away from time from the real learning that students need to do. But if they already are doing that, isn't the test just a measurement of what's being taught in school? Instead of, people always say to me, and we hear it a lot, you're teaching to the test. And my response to them always back is always this. If we have a test that says by, for example, grade 6, you have to read at a certain level, or you have to be able to do simple algebraic equations, my question to you, sir, isn't that a good thing?
Yes, it is a good thing, but it should not dominate our school, and we should make provisions for different speeds of learning. In other words, exactly 6th grade, everybody's got to learn such and such. I think we should make them more flexible, more fluid. I'm not against accountability, so we're on the same page.
Okay. Senator Vasconcellos.
Just one point. I'm not sure we're in disagreement. The problem right now is in some high schools, they're spending 12 full days a year taking tests. So to have a test, an assessment, that's used then diagnostically is fine. But to have 12 tests or 12 days of tests is 12 days you aren't learning. That's the problem, is the proliferation of testing, rather than some coherent system that informs us in the way you want to be informed, doesn't take up all that learning time in the process.
Right.
Thank you very, very much.
Thank you very much.
Some of you have copies of this and some of you don't, so I wanted to make sure. I don't know if you got one of these.
Sure. One of these?
Sorry, I'm going to start over and introduce myself. My name is Barbara McCombs. I am the director of the Center for Human Motivation Research and Development at the University of Denver Research Institute. We've been studying for a number of years, and I'm hoping that each of you have a copy of a paper that was distributed, I think, prior to this meeting. I and other members of the educational and school psychology community have, since the early 1990s, been trying to accumulate, we call the technical term for that a meta-analysis. What is it that we know and can verify in the last 100 years of research in terms of learning, motivation, human development? What are the conditions and contexts that best promote learning? We were talking last night among us, many of these people I had not met before, but my story really starts as a parent and as a learner myself when I, a number of years ago, became concerned, first as a student, about why it was that so many of my classmates, and now this goes back many years, were not very curious and motivated to learn in school. I was fortunate enough to be one of those students who was very curious and motivated to learn. Family background, a whole lot of other situational factors made my situation perhaps more optimal than others. I began studying some of the situations in graduate school, motivation, curiosity, and other things, because then later, as a parent, I watched my children with all this boundless natural curiosity, eager to go to school, eager to learn, and as early as first, second, and third grade, seeing a lot of that initial curiosity and motivation going away. I have since researched that, and my story really starts with what is it that we've known really probably since the beginning of time about what makes for successful learning and motivation? What are the conditions and the contexts for that? And why is it that it isn't happening and hasn't been happening in our nation's schools? The Learner-Centered Principles document that I handed you, this is actually the second iteration of a document that was created by a special task force beginning in the early 1990s when we went back, as I said, to a century of published research, tried to pull together not just the latest research fad, because I know working in schools that teachers are tired of hearing about the latest research-based innovation in education. But what is it that we've learned that stood the test of time? And we really didn't know what we were creating when we started. We didn't know that it would be called learner-centered. We didn't know that it was going to be a set of principles. We didn't know that these principles were going to organize themselves in these domains that you see represented on this chart up here. What do we know that stood the test of time about the cognitive, metacognitive, intellectual part of learning? What is it we've learned about the role of motivation and emotion, affect, in learning and achievement? What are the developmental and social factors that interact with all of that? And what are the other kinds of individual differences in backgrounds and cultures, the other sorts of things that impact learning and motivation and development? What we saw when we got finished was a number of things, and I don't have time to give you really the more important parts of this, but a lot of it's in the paper. But what we saw when we got done was that this was a new framework, a new foundation, that what it implied is that, one, all of us are learners, cradle to grave. We could not call these child-centered, student-centered, that they in fact were learner-centered. If you have time to read through these principles and their explanations, you'll see that they apply to all of us, to our teachers as learners, to all of us. But what it implied is that the previous dichotomy in thinking that had been associated with other definitions of child-centered, person-centered, some even learner-centered, where people were afraid it was too much focused on affect or too much on the learner side, not rigorous enough, that it in fact pulled together a balanced view on the learner and on learning. But what it implied from an instructional perspective is that the most effective model for learning has to begin with knowing who the learner learner is as an individual. Students are currently alienated from school and disengaged, disenfranchised, many of them, because they know that they're only a number in a system, that they're not personally known, that their individual needs and backgrounds and personalities aren't respected. So the model assumes that every instructional decision must begin with knowing the learner, surrounded by the best knowledge base. What is learning? How does learning occur as a goal-directed, constructed, meaning-making process? Then surrounded by what is the knowledge and skills? What are the standards, as a gentleman said earlier? What is that knowledge base that we want each of our learners to learn? If knowledge gets in the center, which has been happening in the standards-based movement, the students know it. They aren't the central focus of education, and that's part of the problem. I want to show you just a couple. Know if this is a familiar term to some of you, but for many of us trying to do systemic reform guided by the best of what we know about learning and learners, we've seen that the system is out of balance in another way. Instead of looking at education as a living system, a system that functions to serve a human need, that is learning and education, we've tended to put all of our emphasis on the technical part of education, the content, the standards, the assessments, the curriculum. Or we've tended to focus on how does time get managed, what are the schedules, how do decisions get made, the organizational part of it, but we've left people out. And we have a system in distress right now because the people in the system, teachers, students, and administrators, are demoralized, they're disengaged, and they're alienated, and that's an unsatisfactory condition. We have data now on over 30,000 students from kindergarten through college age, and what we have learned very simply is that the pyramid of instructional practices that will guarantee engaged learners achieving at their highest levels begins with those practices that create positive relationships, a positive climate for learning, followed by practices we call honor student voice, but practices that give students a partnership and ownership in the learning process, followed by practices that support their critical thinking and learning skills, and then last are practices that adapt to them as individuals. And the reason why that pyramid is inverted, many people see learner-centered as meaning adapting to individual differences, is from the student's perspective, if their classrooms are places where they feel cared about, they fit in, they belong, where they're safe to learn, where their voice, their perspective is honored, listened to, and respected, where their thinking and learning skills are supported, from their perspective, they've been adapted to. But you can see that that means teachers need time to learn to know their individual students. And in far too many of our nation's schools today, that's what's going out by the effort to cover the curriculum, to teach to the test, and teachers simply say, I don't have time to get to know my students. And we say they don't have time not to. And I'm going to stop there. I think I've just about got my 8 minutes done. I have much more to tell you, but, and I would like to just say this. I think a lot of you need to understand, from my perspective, one of my passionate concerns about our condition of education comes from living in Denver and being part of what has happened in the aftermath of Columbine. And I don't think any of you, and many of you here, have seen some of the other tragedies that are a result of school violence. And our children were begging to be listened to. They were begging for meaningful, relevant curricula. They were begging to just be heard, and that still hasn't happened. And so I think we have an opportunity, and I'm very honored, and I'm very, I guess, proud to be part of an assembly that is interested in taking an initiative to change what could be a wrong direction for education.
Thank you very much. We have a couple of questions. First, Senator Vasconcellos.
Just, two comments. First is, I chair a Senate Education Committee, the other house, and our major issue this year is preventing school violence and looking at what is at the root of that, and I'd love to have your involvement with us in that effort. Secondly, I've read quickly through your principles, and I agree with all that you said and all your principles.
Well,
And for me, there's one that's not here that comes before all these, and that's who is the child and how does he or she arrive? I have a friend named David. You ever come across a guy named David Bolton? My friend David Bolton is a Silicon Valley inventor now in Hawaii. One day he said to me, he said, I believe every child arrives in this world with an instinct for learning as powerful as that for food or sex. And if we start with that, then put these on top of that, then the child grows and learns whole to become together. But making that explicit for me is always the first step, and I was surprised. It was implicit what you said.
I think it is implicit.
But I think it's
just
so,
an understood premise.
But I don't think it is.
Probably not.
In the public dialogue, I mean, we live in a world where we have to understand issues and then market them in ourselves. And so to make explicit what is the most foundational is, at least for me, the best way to get people to move with me towards then what comes next. So I want to encourage you in the third iteration to think about whether that might be a...
Let's talk more. I'd love to figure out how we could do that.
Fine, okay.
Assemblymember Leach.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good afternoon, Dr. McCombs. I'm curious, in the hierarchy you had here, I haven't heard anything really mentioned in terms of the personalities of the people that go into teaching and how enthused they are, how varied they are in their presentations, just the excitement that they radiate as they present their material. What factor or how large a role do you think that plays in terms of the individual who stands in that classroom from day to day, is truly excited about the subject matter themselves and has a wonderful way of conveying that to the young people from one year to the next, much less one day to the next, but from one year to the next, that they stay very much engaged and they have, in their mind, chosen the right career path and they're in love with their subject matter, whatever it might be. And that comes across as they share that information with young people. I've watched this process working with adults over the last 25 years. And my experience, even as a political figure, quite frankly, the more excited you are, the more obviously you believe, the more passionate, if you want to use that term, about your subject matter, the more you are able to engage your audience, whether they be children or adults. What part is that playing in the research that you're doing?
Boy, that's a story that would take a while. I'll be happy to talk to you more. There's no short answer to your question other than to say it plays a tremendous role. As we ask people to remember, one of the things about a teacher that made the most difference in their lives, that enthusiasm and excitement about their subject matter, their model of a lifelong learner is absolutely close to the top of the list in hundreds of groups. So we know that it's a highly significant factor. We also know that modeling, we teach the way we're taught, and the models that are presented to children are far more powerful than what they're learning in terms of content and facts. And, there's a lot to be said about that topic. I think that one other short thing that I'd like to say, because I know this is on your agenda later, we've also been studying the qualities of the most effective teachers. And there are some non-negotiables. We have a myth in education that anybody can be a teacher, and it simply isn't true. There are certain qualities and characteristics of human beings that others have found in their research as well map onto the qualities of effective helpers. They have to have some concern with other human beings, but that passionate about learning and about their subject matter, certainly for teachers, is right up there on the list.
My follow-up then would be, is there an attempt within teacher training preparation programs to take that individual who walks in the door saying, I want to be a teacher, and to use their personality and to further develop it, to give them the tools? I mean, I have watched probably thousands of people at this juncture in my life in both the business world as well as in the political arena stand up and deliver messages and try to influence people, try to sell them on something, if not themselves, certainly. And some of them, well, they all have a different personality, but they have taken that personality and developed strengths and downplayed weaknesses, but that have been able to convey the appropriate information and ultimately to get people to do what they want to, or significant numbers of them. And I'm just curious in terms of how much of this information is ending up in teacher preparation to be able to use to take that apparently interested person coming in the door who says, I want to be a teacher, or I certainly am looking at that, and take that personality and develop them, give them the tools so that they can turn around and be effective in that classroom and develop whatever natural skills they have or are lacking.
In answer to your question, there are a number of schools around the country that are trying to take these principles and the research that's been generated around them and build them into their teacher preparation program. Two other points I want to make, however. If you take the knowledge base seriously, it means we have a more inclusive, not a more restrictive model in some ways. And by that I mean what we've learned is that it takes as much diversity in teachers to reach and teach the diversity of our children. There are some non-negotiables. You can't have teachers who really don't care about children. You can't have teachers who believe that they must be the authority figure and aren't willing to be co-learners with their students and partners in the learning process. But a lot of these things can be learned. There are very few personality dispositions, if someone is willing to be a teacher, that they can't learn the right stuff, so to speak. But our research has shown that learner-centered teachers, although there are a few things, rubrics, if you will, that we've defined for these teachers, a lot of them are as varied in personality as the individuals that they need to teach, because teachers that might not reach me might reach you, and we need all of them. We just need a different system for getting them assigned and sorted and in the place they need to be.
Thank you. Yeah, just to follow up on what you said, Ms. Leach, about giving teachers the tools that they need to be effective. I think one of the most frustrating things that teachers are feeling right now is that the legislature has really piled on a number of reforms in the last 5 years, almost more than the system can handle effectively. And it's more than just having good teacher training and that type of thing. It has to do a lot with your working conditions and the kinds of things that you need as a teacher, such as support services, such as school psychologists, school counselors, nurses, librarians, etc. And as you know, California is not doing too well in that particular area in terms of support services. And it's also about really giving teachers a voice and empowering them to, in fact, make the decisions that they need to make. They are the ones who best know their student population, whom they work with 7 hours a day, 5 days a week. So it has a lot to do, I think, with really trusting their integrity as a professional. And I think that the message that teachers have gotten from the state in the last several years has been, we know what's best, and so you need to just kind of follow our orders. So I think, we really need to kind of rethink the teacher's role in all this, because certainly they have the most impact on student learning.
Well, and one other comment I would make, just that I hope that people aren't overlooking as they think through this. We have a fear-based system in place. Nobody performs at their optimum levels when they're governed by fear. And I just think for students and teachers alike, we've got to turn that in another direction.
Right. And just one final remark, having said what I just said, your model here, the domains of a learner-centered classroom, I really believe, because having been really most recently a classroom teacher before I came to the legislature, that a lot of the things that you're talking about can in fact be incorporated in classroom techniques and methodologies and still keep, the test, still keep the standards. But in fact, a lot of these, particular methodologies can be better utilized to teach the standards. Do you feel that that's something that can be done?
Absolutely. In fact, one thing I didn't say, we're starting to gather a database of schools that are doing exactly what you're saying, that are still meeting the standards. Their kids are still performing at the top of their whatever state or national achievement tests that they're governed by, but they're not making it a deadly drill and kill kind of curriculum, and kids are engaged, and they found ways. There's a wonderful videotape, by the way, Phi Delta Kappa distributes, called Reaching for the North Star, about a K-8 school in Vermont that tells everybody exactly how they're doing it. So there are some wonderful models out there.
Good, and we would really like to hear from those models. Assemblymember Havas.
I just wanted to kind of key into that a bit of a comment that you got to about how it, well, I translated it to mean we really need all kinds of teachers, all kinds of personalities. And I think you're very right about that, because the children need to learn. There are all kinds of people in the world too. And then they have an opportunity to learn all these different styles and different personalities right from the start. You know, we can't have just a certain kind of personality or a certain kind of approach. It has to come from all these different directions. When I remember my, long time ago, first grade teacher who inspired me to be a teacher, in the first grade, Miss Mary Key, very tailored suit, straight-laced and prim and proper, a wonderful person. And that to Mr. Maestas in the 5th grade, who was just a kind of a casual guy, who taught us all a very beautiful song to sing when we were feeling down. It was when you're feeling down in the dumps, take off your hat and lean out flat and do what I always do, give yourself a pat on the back. I'm not going to sing it for you, but, you know, I won't torture you with that. But from all these different styles, and I'm sure there are still a lot of Miss Mary Keys around, and a lot of Mr. Maestases, and maybe Mrs. Maestases around. So that's a wonderful comment to make.
Thank you very much.
Hello, my name is... Hello, my name is Dr. David Chernoff. I received a master's in education and psychology from Harvard University, a PhD in education from University of Chicago, and I'm presently serving a research associate position at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. My research, which has been published in a number of scholarly journal articles and book chapters, has focused on applying theories of subjective experience and optimal engagement to educational contexts. I've also been a teacher in a number of different contexts. I believe that my primary role as a witness today is to represent students. All of the data which I'm going to be reporting to you today was taken from students' direct reports of their experiences in public high school classrooms. So I'm going to start my time in, next slide please. I'm going to speak to 3 research questions. First, what is the status of student engagement in high school classes? Second, what are the factors influencing student engagement? And third, how is the student engagement related to long-term and short-term educational outcomes? Next slide, please. The theoretical grounding point of my conceptualization of student engagement comes from prominent psychologist Mihai Csikszentmihalyi's theory of optimal experience, or flow. Flow is a state of mind brought on by intense interest and involvement in an activity in which it's total concentration and immersion in an activity, so much so that you lose sense of time, you lose track of time and lose sense of yourself, and there's an underlying sense of enjoyment and exhilaration. It's what athletes refer to as, quote, being in the zone. I borrow from this theory and define student engagement as high interest, concentration, and enjoyment in high school classrooms. Next slide, please. What's important for you to know is that most of the data, the studies I'm drawing on, come from 526 10th and 12th grade students in 13 school-based sites across the country. We analyzed 3,630 snapshots of student experiences while in high school using an innovative method developed by Dr. Csikszentmihalyi called Experience Sampling Method, or ESM, in which we give students these digital wristwatches, just like this one, pre-programmed to sound or beep at 8 random times through the day. Students wear this watch for about a week, and when it beeps or when it sounds, they fill out a self-report form, which asks them what they're doing, where they are, and a number of self-report questions about their experience. How much are you concentrating? How interested are you in what you're doing? Next slide, please. Basically, students report less interest in classrooms than when they're not in classrooms. Students, by no small measure, report less enjoyment when they're in classrooms than when they're not in classrooms. They do report higher concentration when they're in classrooms, but overall, they report less engagement, and in particular, there's little room for enjoyment in the classrooms. Next slide. Now to the question of what affects student engagement. According to the flow theory, being in a flow state is brought on by using all of your available skills to reach a very difficult challenge, such as an athlete or a musician when they're in the midst of their top performance. Alternatively, when skills and challenges are both low, students are more likely to feel apathetic. When challenges are higher than the skills, then students are likely to feel anxious about, for example, the prospects of unsuccessful completion, as with test anxiety. When students have more skills than they need to even meet the challenge, then they're more likely to be in a state of relaxation. Next slide, please. Does this theory apply to classroom context? Yes, it does. When students are experiencing higher challenges and skills in the flow condition, they are reporting higher than average concentration and engagement, not just higher than average in classrooms, higher than average everything they do throughout the week. And their lowest concentration and engagement when skills and challenges are low. Next slide, please. What about attention? Well, in the apathy condition, when challenges and skills are low, students are paying attention 40% of the time. When when challenges and skills are high, students are paying attention on average 70% of the time. Almost twice as frequently are students paying attention, just by having skills high enough to be a good match for student skills. Next question. Slide. Thank you. Another factor that facilitates student engagement is having instruction that is meaningful and relevant to students' lives, to their future goals and their interests outside of the classroom. Next slide, please. As far as classroom activities, students report being much more engaged in group work and individual work than when taking a test and a quiz, when watching a TV or a video, or when listening to a student lecture, or listening to their teacher lecture, excuse me. The interesting thing is that students, when they're taking a test or a quiz, for example, they find it challenging and they're concentrating really hard, but they report really not enjoying it and really not wanting to do it. Almost the opposite when they're watching TV. They enjoy it, they say they want to do it, they want to be there, but they don't find it challenging, they don't find it important, and basically not relevant. Next slide, please. What about school subject? In general, students report being much more engaged, as was alluded earlier, in their non-academic subjects of art, computer science, and vocational education than their academic ones, their traditional academic ones. And here again, students report that during their activities in math class, they find very challenging and they're concentrated, but they don't enjoy being there. They're not interested in it, and they're not engaged on those emotional levels nearly to the same degree that they are in their non-academic classes. Next slide. Thank you. Part of this may have to do with how students spend their time while in the different school subjects. For example, when in math, science, and history, students report listening to lecture between 20 and 30% of the time. Compared to, for example, computer science class, they're only listening to the teacher lecture 6% of the time. Individual work, they are listening to in science and history, they are engaged in individual work 15 to 13% of the time, but up to 60% of the time in computer science class and 44% of the time in art. What about tests and quizzes? In math class, their report taking a test or a quiz up to over 20% of their time while they're in math class. What about group work, which was mentioned earlier? Well, actually, science leads the way there with 12.7%, presumably because of a lot of science labs. But other than that, most classes, students report being in some kind of group activity less than 5% of the time. Next slide, please. Now I'm going to speak to the third research question. What is the relationship between engagement and academic outcomes? I tested 3 research questions. First, is there a relationship between engagement and short-term academic performance? The answer was that short-term performance was associated with increases in attention, but not with enjoyment or interest. Next slide, please. Secondly, does engagement predict long-term continuing motivation? The answer appeared to be yes. Holding constant a variety of student background characteristics, interest and enjoyment in high school science class was a significant predictor of the choice of a science major 2 years later while enrolled in college. Next slide, please. Does engagement, and this is really the kicker, does engagement in math and science class predict long-term academic performance? The answer appeared to be yes. In fact, holding constant the same student background variables, how much interest and enjoyment students reported at random moments in high school math and science class was a stronger predictor of grades 2 years later in college than grades while in high school. I'm right about at time, but I could present my conclusion in about a minute, if that's okay. This looks complicated, but really it's not. Basically, students feel challenged. When students feel challenged and relevant, and that instruction is relevant, they're more likely to concentrate and pay attention, as they sometimes report in math classes when taking a test. I refer to this process as academic intensity, and academic intensity does appear to lead to short-term motivation and performance. On the other hand, when students are feeling active, when they are utilizing their skills, and when they feel more in control, as they sometimes report, for example, in art class, then they report higher enjoyment. And I refer to this process as positive emotional response, which does lead to longer-term motivation and performance. The overall point, I think, of this presentation is that in high school public instruction, academic intensity and positive emotions, opportunities for both of those, rarely occurs simultaneously. But that probably should be the goal, because when students are concentrating and interested and enjoying what they're doing, then they're more likely to reach the flow state. They're more likely to realize positive educational outcomes both in the short term and in the long term. So if the question is whether or not the sports model, for example, can infuse some of these elements into the educational system, whether or not that's a good idea, I think absolutely. In fact, that's exactly what needs to be occurring. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, I wanted to ask you a little bit about that point about science interest or involvement in science and math in high school, and the relationship to the correlation between the grades in high school and the grades in college. Could you clarify that a bit or expand on it?
Yes, basically we took analyzed. There was a follow-up study in which we to the high school data where we followed and tracked students in college, and basically just taking the engagement variable, how engaged, particularly it was enjoyment and interest that correlated very strongly. In science class, for example. Was there a correlation? And this is, using regression equations where we're, controlling for all of those background variables. Was it associated with whether or not they chose, they opted for a major in science?
Oh, okay.
And there was engagement, interest, and enjoyment in the high school science classes was a predictor of that. And in addition, taking the math, looking at overall engagement in math and science classes was also a significant predictor of to give you a little more information, it was their self-reported grades while they were in college. So you might want to take that into consideration. But I have no reason to believe that would be biased one way or another.
So the reported grades from the individuals in other subjects rather.
Yes, this was their overall. Once in
overall.
college, it was their overall grade point average that they reported. But I still found it remarkable that of all of these variables in the equation that were predictors, background variables, students' grades in high school, it was. I mean, there's all kinds of reasons why this wouldn't work out. Actually, I could go into it, but I found that kind of phenomenal that the strongest predictors were interest and enjoyment in the high school classes were the strongest predictors of overall grades in college. So I think that engagement does relate to educational outcomes, important ones, but not the ones receiving the most attention by the field of education or by policymakers, which are very fixated on measures of short-term grades and short-term test scores. These studies, on the other hand, would suggest that enjoyment, interest, engagement are foundational for longer-term skill development, subsequent commitment, and career development. Some of these findings have also been collaborated in more extensive studies of talented youth, and I could refer you to those studies.
So the long term rather than the short term.
Yes, that's what I believe.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
My name is Tim Byers. I'm a professor of preventive medicine, also from Denver, although Barbara and I met for the first time last night. I'm at the School of Medicine. I'm also the Associate Director of the University of Colorado Cancer Center. My work is largely outside of the realm of what we've been hearing about this afternoon. My work is largely in the area of preventive medicine, cancer prevention, and cancer treatment studies. How does it happen then that I'm standing here before you now? Joel Kirsch called me a few weeks ago saying that he had learned of some of my work from others. He was interested in having somebody come to speak to health, somebody come to speak to the epidemic of obesity. And in fact, I've worked in that realm as well, because there is a link between physical activity, overweight, and cancer. I recently was helped to author a report that should be coming out within any day now, I think, from the World Health Organization. That'll be a statement about the importance of physical activity and obesity and cancer prevention. You seem to be getting shorter and shorter.
I know.
Yeah, I noticed that. And
it's not nutrition.
Yeah, no, it's mechanical, I know. So I think it's as a result of this World Health Organization publication that Joel learned my name, and they called me up, and he said, well, could you come to give some testimony? He asked what was it all about. And when I heard that it was about this idea that the physical health and intellectual learning need to be better fused in our schools, I said, sure, I'll come and do that. And the reason is not only because of my own experiences in school and education and my own kids as they've all now finished public education, but my wife is also an elementary school teacher, and she brings home these stories about what's happening in the public schools, about this disconnect between mind, body, and spirit that is happening as a result of all the pressures on education, and that concerns me substantially. I'm going to make my comments very brief, and then I know you wanted to talk as well about poverty and nutrition and poverty and health. I'd be happy to do that. Briefly, what I want to say is not news to anybody, and that is that there is an obesity epidemic, not only in the U.S., but in fact worldwide. In many developing countries, an epidemic of obesity with the consequence of hypertension, diabetes, and now we're starting to see early onset heart disease and cancer in the developing world, and certainly here in the U.S. As well. It's a problem that is not surprising that it's happening, but what has been really remarkable and surprising is the speed with which our body sizes and obesity levels have been increasing in the last 10 to 20 years. So the steepness of the epidemic has really captured a lot of us by surprise. The Surgeon General has in fact labeled it an epidemic of obesity, and it has involved our kids. Kids are more sedentary and eating higher caloric-dense diets than ever before. And despite the fact that we have national goals to reverse this epidemic, and despite the fact that we have national goals to equalize the socioeconomic and racial and ethnic gaps in health over the next 10 years, we are, in fact, at the moment doing nothing other than to assure that those gaps are going to get wider into the future. The Surgeon General, Satcher, who's recently left office, has stated that left unabated, overweight and obesity may soon cause as much preventable disease and death as cigarette smoking. Many people believe that dealing with overweight and obesity is a personal responsibility, and indeed it is. To some degree, they're right, he says, but it is also a community responsibility. When there are no safe, accessible places for children to play or adults to walk, jog, or ride a bike, that is a community responsibility. And when school lunchrooms or office cafeterias do not provide healthy and appealing food choices, that also is a community responsibility. So he is acknowledging this, and next week there will be a publication come out of which I'm the principal author, which is new guidelines from the American Cancer Society on nutrition, physical activity, and cancer prevention. And next week, for the first time, the American Cancer Society will put it as a major guideline not only the individual behaviors and choices, which we've had for years, but also a new guideline that is as follows. Public, private, and community organizations should work to create social and physical environments that support the adoption and maintenance of healthful nutrition and physical activity behaviors. So this is now as a guideline for communities. And the two activities are to increase access to healthful foods in schools, work sites, and communities, and secondly, to provide safe, enjoyable, and accessible environments for physical activity in schools and for transportation and recreation in communities. So this link between mind and body is going to be coming out, and the importance of physical health in schools is going to be coming out shortly from American Cancer Society as well as the World Health Organization in publications. So the trends are remarkable. We're now seeing substantial increases in the last decade in diabetes in adults, but now also, shockingly to most of us, a condition of diabetes that we previously referred to as adult onset diabetes is now occurring in adolescence, and especially in minority communities, American Indian, Latino communities. We're seeing adult onset diabetes in teenagers who are substantially overweight. The health risk to obesity is not just diabetes and eventually cancers such as breast and colon cancers, but most importantly, heart disease as well. The heart disease and cancer trends have all been positive, and they continue to be positive. Death rates from cancer and heart disease are on the decline, and frankly, despite the obesity epidemic, I doubt that those are going to turn around. But the consequence of the obesity epidemic, both for adults and in the future for our children, is that the future gains that they can make in cancer and heart disease will be blunted. And in fact, it will be costing lives into the future. So in conclusion, I would just like to say that the last 10, 20 years have really been surprising and remarkable with regard to the steepness of the epidemic of obesity. There's no mystery as to why that's happening. Caloric overload in consequence with inadequate physical activity, both for children and adults. And the future burden of chronic diseases that our children will inevitably bear due to this early onset of obesity early in life, I think we should regard as a sobering challenge as our responsibilities as adults. As we contemplate their future, we need to seriously consider how we can improve the personal, family, and community support for healthy eating and physical activity for all, and especially for our children. And with regard to that, in schools, this whole approach of that we're hearing about today is in fact new to me, but it resonates as as something that makes a lot of sense, that physical health, physical activity, engagement of kids in all the dimensions of mind, body, and spirit as part of the learning experience, I think is a direction we need to figure out how to go. So thanks for your time and attention. I'd be happy to respond to your question about poverty and nutrition. And it's true that there is a gap in obesity and also a gap in quality of diet that is a socioeconomic gap here in the United States. I think it's getting wider and wider because of the availability of healthy food and healthy food choices. Also, the gap in social class for tobacco and other unhealthy behaviors, I think, is getting wider as well.
Weren't there also studies or a study that showed that the use of drugs seemed to rise when the children were hungry, when they went to school hungry, that they seemed to be susceptible to being talked into drugs?
I'm not aware of that,
yeah,
of any particular study along those lines.
I wish I could remember.
Yeah, my suspicion would be that as poor nutrition travels with social class and poverty, everything else comes along with that as well. So I wouldn't be surprised if that might not be the case. I think, however, being physically hungry is probably pretty low on a long list of reasons for drug abuse.
Well, for the middle class, it seems it's or middle income people. It seems to be more of junk food eating or fast food eating. But for people with low income, it's the most economical food is the most highly caloric and cholesterol and everything else laden that causes all these problems. So it used to be that if people didn't have the money to buy food, they were skinny, like my Uncle Larry, but not anymore. Can you explain how that happened? Why should that be that instead of, it's the quality of the food, it must be.
Yeah, it's a quality and also the quantity. I mean, it is the calories and the caloric overload. And when I was at the Centers for Disease Control working on nutrition there a few years ago, we were commissioned by Congress to do a study of hunger in America, which we did. And we went out and went to the poorest areas in the U.S., down in the Delta and Mississippi and everywhere, to look for hunger. And in fact, we found it. But we also found in those communities, concomitant with hunger was obesity.
Yes.
Obesity is American malnutrition. And the types of food and diet and the lack of activity that is seen in communities of poverty, in part because of safety concerns. I mean, living in a ghetto or in a poor community where there's drugs and stuff going on, you're not going to let your kids ride bikes.
Mm-hmm. And where
they're going to stay home and eat the potatoes and the greasy foods that are easy to get. So we need to have healthy foods accessible and affordable in all communities in America, but also safe places for kids to be out and to be active.
Parks and recreation areas in the urban centers or in the other areas besides out in the outskirts in the open areas that aren't developed yet.
Yes.
I sure agree. I agree with you a great deal.
And programs in our schools where our kids spend a substantial amount of their time, programs that make them to be active.
Yeah. Thank you.
Assemblymember Jackson.
Yes, thank you. Even though I haven't been here, I've been listening to you on my TV and all. I want to ask you to try to address the other part of this equation, also sometimes referred to as eating disorders, is the situation, a great tragedy, I think, in our country, where kids don't even have an excuse for not eating well, but because of body image or whatever in the world it is that we are promoting as a society, they suffer malnutrition from anorexia. And I'm advised that statistically, I guess they've identified that 1/3 of all teenage girls in this country have some form of eating disorder. Now, I assume that includes obesity, but it also includes this countervailing factor that I'm told leads to osteoporosis and I'm sure all sorts of health problems when you deny yourself of nutrition and so forth, and the eat purge syndrome. This is also clearly something that has to impact a child's ability to learn.
Sure.
Have you done any research on that? And if so, what are those results, and what do you suggest we try to do to deal with that problem as well?
I've done only a little, and that's several years ago on that, but I kind of tracked that a little bit. I think that the problem with the whole range of eating disorders can start very early in life, certainly in adolescence. The problem with the problem with anorexia, I think, is in large part due to our fixation on skinniness and healthiness. In fact, there are a range of body sizes that can be healthy, that we are born genetically to be of a certain familial type, and within those types, it's the physical fitness that is the strong determinant then of diabetes risk, of heart disease risk, and in fact of breast and colon cancer risk. So it's a level of activity and fitness. We tend to use fatness and obesity as sort of the easy handle on it. So when I talk about the obesity epidemic, in fact, the substantial amount of that is, in fact, unhealthy overweight that's happened. So with regard to bulimia and anorexia, those are serious problems, and I think gets back to this idea that it's this dislink between physical health and fitness and everything else we teach in society, and so that's why I'm here to endorse this idea of our educational systems being mind, body, and spirit involved.
Well, it would seem that, you know, as part of the health that we teach children, that it shouldn't be based upon this artificial image. I remember when I was a kid, it was Twiggy. But Twiggy was sort of an anomaly and a kind of a, you know, something that we looked at and thought, this can't be.
If you look at her now, she's not that unusual compared to the current magazine standard.
Right. And so, you know, I think that as a society, we bear some responsibility for encouraging our young people, for whatever reason, to have this model. I mean, you see the Calvin Klein, I don't know if they still do it, but, you know, that sort of heroin-addicted look was the model that existed. I can't remember the actress's name, who ultimately, I guess, did put herself into a rehabilitation clinic for heroin abuse. I mean, these are the models that these kids see today. And I would think that as we talk about nutrition and we talk about health in school, and certainly I think we have to, I think it is all integrated, as everybody's been talking about, but we have to look at it from all the different perspectives and what society encourages, what poverty does, the importance on healthy fitness, as you know, the body being a machine that needs to be well oiled and well cared for, like an automobile. I mean, that's not necessarily a great analogy, but you use whatever's going to work. Mm-hmm. And also the responsibilities of the school. And we had this discussion, it was referenced earlier, about junk foods in school. I think that at the same time that we're talking about trying to teach healthy lifestyles, we have Coke machines and candy machines and potato chips and all the stuff that we sell at school. I think it's actually shameful that when we were debating this issue, a lot of the schools came in to oppose measures that would encourage us, God forbid, to sell apples instead of Coca-Cola. And I think that we cannot be hypocritical. Kids are the first to point out when we're hypocrites, and you can't teach them much when you're saying one thing on the one hand and doing another on the other hand. So I don't know if that's part of the discussion today, but I think it's something that we have to take into account as we as adults try to promote, better learning capacities, and certainly identifying what some of them are. But we gotta walk the walk as well as just talk the talk.
Thank you. Follow up, Ms. Havas? Did you have?
Yeah, we sure do talk the talk, though, don't we? All of us, I'm afraid. I just want, I was trying to think of how all we're talking about, or you're presenting to us, is relating to methodologies, and it really relates to what the first speaker told us about how It does. And I was remembering that I visited a high school in my district a while back where the chemistry teacher was teaching the composition of something or another, and I don't even remember. I'm sure if I would have been a student there, I would remember. But he took the 2% fat label on a milk carton, and this was in a high school, and these were regular students. It was not any kind of special class. And he went through tremendous mathematical explanations that was really fascinating on how you can be fooled as a consumer on this fat versus no fat and 2% and 1% and what are they really talking about. It was phenomenal. And then we have things like, right now I got this cranberry juice a little while ago, and I chose between this one and another one based upon the contents. And I don't think anyone ever told us that in school. Of course, I went to school a few years ago. But I don't know if they're doing that, but it seems like this would be the kind of methodology that would fit into what this, the theory and the research are showing us. You know, the theory and then the research, and now the methodologies can fit into that.
I agree. I think a lot of nutrition education can be done, like you just heard, in the name of math or geography. You know, where are cranberries grown? You know, you could talk about the whole culture and so forth.
So what are they good for? What's cranberry juice good for?
Yeah. What's the ascorbic acid? What's in there?
Oh, yeah.
The other comment I would make would be on standardized testing, which keeps getting bashed here and there, but it's the reality. We have it, and so then the question is, how then can we use that creatively to teach things that we want to teach? In fact, how can we use standardized testing experiences to demonstrate that when the kids are together, you know, in mind, body, and spirit, they actually do better on the tests. So I think sometimes these challenges are really just opportunities for us.
Concentrate better.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you to all of our panelists. And now we are going to have some school principals come up. This will be a panel. Sandra Lee, Vincent Matthews, and Evan Smith. Sandra is from the Harvey Milk Civil Rights Academy in San Francisco. Vincent is from the Edison Charter School in San Francisco, and Evan is from the Coulterville Greeley School in San Francisco. Welcome.
Hello. Hi, my name is Sandy Lee. I'm the principal at Harvey Milk Civil Rights Academy in San Francisco, and it is a relatively new alternative school that was formed in 1996 from a failing alternative school that had been there in place for many years. When we first formed Harvey Milk, we were faced with a school that was not safe and a student body that was much more interested in fighting, and a playground that was not safe, and an academic program that was not high in its expectations based on the fact that the children were not safe enough to learn. And we spent a lot of time looking at what it meant to be a civil rights academy and talking about what kind of program and school we wanted to present and build and grow from. And we came up with 4 main principles that we wanted to build our school around. Those principles are that we wanted to empower our students to learn through, first of all, teaching tolerance and nonviolence. That was our #1 mission statement. The second was through promoting high academic achievement. The third was through celebrating our diversity as a school community. And the fourth was building a strong home-school community connection. We've taken those 4 mission statements and really lived them as principles of the school. We had to begin, we call it securing the perimeter, basically by reteaching our children how to play and rebuilding a school community that was safe enough to then take that play and move the kids into the classroom and have high expectations around student achievement. And we looked at a variety of different programs and a variety of different ways of doing that. We have conflict managers, we have peace patrols, we have peace tables in every classroom. We have ways of promoting peace throughout the school, but when we stumbled on First Pass, which is a program by the American Sports Institute, we stumbled on something really special. And PASS means promoting achievement in school through sport. And I want to tell you that it's sport, not sports. And it's a program that has unified the school in terms of the tolerance and nonviolence. Other people are going to speak to it as well, but this particular program has really unified the school as a climate that is warm and safe and supportive of student learning.
Good afternoon. My name is Vincent Matthews. I've been a public school educator for the last 17 years and a public school administrator for the last 12 years. During the years of 1992 to 1996, I was the vice principal at Tamalpais High School, which is in Mill Valley, and the PASS program was at that school for those 5 years. I watched the program, I watched the students in the program, and I can tell you that the students in the program turned themselves around. Many of those students were students who were at risk of dropping out of school. They certainly were students who were not, definitely not engaged in school. And talking to those students about what excited them about the PASS program, what they kept coming back to was that for so many of them, in the regular classes or classes outside of PASS, it wasn't about them. It was about everything outside. The PASS program started from within and it looks at what excites you from within and then gets you to be excited about that class and about your other classes in school. As we know, many students will, if they're not motivated and not excited about school, they'll vote with their feet and they'll walk away. So it's important that we look at the student, look at what's exciting the student, talking to students, figuring out what motivates them, and getting them to turn themselves around, and that's exactly what PASS does. I'm not here to sell the PASS program to you. I'm just here to tell you that I was there and watched and am a witness to say that the PASS program does work.
Good afternoon. My name is Evan Smith. I'm principal of Coulterville Greeley School in Mariposa County, not San Francisco. I'm happy to say that.
And I wondered about that, because I knew where Coulterville was.
Yeah.
But you never know. Thank you for correcting us.
Thank you. I have a kindergarten through 8th grade school that's very small, it's rural, it's isolated. We have 112 students in grades kindergarten through 8. And one of our concerns in our surveys last year was the lack of respect that our students were showing towards each other. We were looking for a program that might be able to address that kind of a need on our school site. Personally, I've been involved in sports as a participant, a parent, a coach, an official. As an educator, I've been constantly seeking what is it that we can do to help motivate children to be successful in school. The first PASS program is the elementary part of the PASS program, and it was intriguing to me to be able to look at those kinds of concepts that make students want to participate in sports, and are there some aspects of that that we can bring into the classroom that will help motivate our children to do their best. And what we're seeing 6 months into the program, in talking with our teachers, we're finding 3 areas that we really see a difference. Number 1 is teamwork. Our teachers are reporting that students are much more at ease working together. They're taking pride in what they're doing as a group and working as a team. Secondly, we're looking at the idea of concentration and focus, using some of the martial arts ideas that the First PASS program does, setting the table for children to do a report, to take a test, to prepare themselves emotionally, mentally, to be able to do their best is a real positive aspect. And thirdly, interestingly enough, part of the First PASS program is compliments. And it's very difficult for young people, kindergarten through 8th grade, not only to give compliments to their classmates, but also to receive them. And one of the real positive things that we're seeing is that the children are becoming much more comfortable at being able to give a compliment as well as receive one. And lastly, I'd like just to comment on the sports aspect of competition that is stressed in this First Pass program. Positive competition, the idea that you and I will work together on a project so that both of us improve our skills. Not that I'm going to work so that I can do better than you are, but the idea that we can work together as partners and as a team has been very, very successful, and we're real pleased, and we hope that we'll be able to continue working with the First Pass program at all our grade levels, kindergarten through 8. Thank you.
Assemblymember Jackson has a question.
So I guess this may be the sort of the bottom line question, and maybe it's premature in asking it, but I'm really interested to know whether this kind of incorporation, if you will, of body, mind, and spirit in some form in sport, I'm a big believer in it. I think sport and sports are a wonderful tool. But are we seeing positive results? Are we seeing that kids are, in fact, showing higher test scores when they get to their academics? I mean, basically, we're talking now about developing the whole child, and many of us can't disagree with that. But we do have certain expectations in the state about improving our children's educational performance in the traditional notion of what education is. Are these kinds of programs helping us to achieve those better results so that some folks who find some of the stuff to be a little bit outside their realm of consciousness can still take solace in the fact that our kids are doing better when we ask them to compare their academic performance with children in other parts of either California or nationwide, or worldwide, actually.
I may not be the best one to answer that since we're 6 months into the program and our testing will be in May, but I'm sure feeling, and our teachers are feeling, very positive about the aspects of our students being better prepared to take the tests, to be able to concentrate, to focus, to put everything else out of their minds while they're working on that particular task. And I certainly hope that that's going to be the outcome of our test results for this year. And ideally, I think, in our case, 2 or 3 years down the road, where the children from kindergarten and first grade are now maybe 5th and 6th graders, that we're really going to see progress being made as they work through this program and definitely have an effect on their academic performance as well as their whole livelihood.
Sure. On that point, being at the high school and being at the high school for those 5 years, one, for sure, we know that the number of students, there were some students we were almost positive would have dropped out who did not. So those numbers were definitely decreased. The second thing is that what the program does is it has students look at the things that help them, the elements that help them be successful in sports, and transform those things into their other academic classrooms, like concentration, like focus. And also what the program does is it has students track their GPA so that this is something that they hadn't done previously, but now they're graphing and tracking their GPA, so they're making goals regarding their GPA, where it is now, how much I wanted to increase this semester, how much I wanted to increase next semester. So absolutely, it absolutely does transform and change their other academic areas of school.
And I just want to say there's no magic pill that's going to show instantaneous achievement overnight in schools. But if you don't feel that your school is safe and your kids don't feel that the school is safe, you're not going to see it happen. And the first step is to make sure that that's what the kind of environment you're building for kids is, that when they get off the bus, they want to be there. And that's where we're at. We've got a really warm family community building, and our test scores will go up, but they don't go up overnight. You have to build that kind of mind, body, and spirit through various programs, and First Pass is one of those programs that really works.
Thank you. I would like to just suggest that as this discussion goes forward, that is sort of one of the underlying questions and principles I think that are being addressed here. And if we could get each of the speakers or those who have been tracking this, who can show some kind of outcome-based results. Certainly we're creating better quality life experiences for these children as you do this. But again, as you mentioned, the testing is here. Can we show that this is a way to, realizing that nothing happens overnight, I couldn't disagree with anything any of you have said, but, and as we go forward, can we show that this is another and very successful method to getting us to higher levels of proficiency on and hopefully success in academic achievement? So I would ask that maybe that be something that each speaker address who has that, has been tracking the data and so forth.
Okay, yeah, we can ask each one of the speakers who have programs that are innovative to comment on how that has helped them on academic achievement. But I would also say that, we're not just talking about one test, we're talking about, ongoing evaluation. I mean, most of us who teach realize that, one test is just a moment in time, so to speak. And what really counts is how those kids are progressing using other instruments to measure their performance. And a good teacher will